What could make a wealthy widow stop in the middle of a dusty street just to ask a lonely rancher one simple question? And why did he hesitate before answering? The blacksmith's hammer crashed against the anvil. Sparks burst into the smoky air as flames raced across the dry pasture. A little boy clutched a carved wooden horse and shouted through the wind, while a folded receipt slipped from trembling fingers. What secret had brought them to this moment? Share where you're watching from as we begin. The Kansas sun hung white over Abilene, bleaching the street until even the shadows looked tired. Cattle dust drifted between the buildings. A locomotive whistle sounded beyond the stockyards, long and lonely, while wagon wheels ground over the hard road. Boots struck the boardwalk. Spurs chimed. Somewhere behind the Grand Central Hotel, a stable hand cursed at a stubborn mule. Eliza Montgomery stepped into the heat wearing a dark blue morning dress, fitted gloves, and a small veil pinned neatly beneath her hat. Her polished traveling case rested beside the hotel door, too fine for the dust already gathering around it. She had spent 6 weeks following an old debt across 3 states. Faded bank names, burned courthouse indexes, letters written by men who had been buried for years. The trail had begun with the Great Chicago Fire and ended, apparently, in Abilene. By that afternoon, Eliza had stopped expecting it to lead anywhere. She walked toward a small eating house near the cattle pens, drawn by the smell of onions and weak coffee. Every table inside was crowded, so several customers had taken their meals beneath the porch awning. That was where she saw the man and the boy. The man wore a sun-faded shirt and an old leather vest darkened by sweat. His forearms bore pale marks from rope, iron, and years of work. The boy beside him could not have been more than 7. His sleeves had been patched carefully at both elbows. Between them sat one chipped bowl of thin stew. The man lifted a spoonful and studied it before passing it to the boy. When the spoon held a piece of meat, the child received it. When there was only broth, the man took it himself. Then he broke their last piece of bread. He gave the soft middle to the boy and kept the crust. Eliza stopped so suddenly that a freight wagon rattled past close enough to stir her skirt. For a moment, she was no longer in Kansas. She remembered her father at a narrow kitchened table in Chicago, sliding the better portion onto her plate and claiming he had already eaten. That had been before the warehouses, before the shipping contracts, before people began calling him Mr. Carter instead of Henry. The boy noticed her staring. His gaze moved from her blue dress to the empty chair across from him. Eliza approached slowly. She did not reach for her purse. She rested one gloved hand on the chair. "May I join you?" The man looked first at her clothes, then at her face. His eyes were gray and guarded, but not unkind. "It's a public table, ma'am," he said, "but you're welcome to the company." The boy leaned closer to his father. "Are you a princess?" A laugh escaped Eliza before she could stop it. It was soft, rusty from disuse. "No," she said, taking the chair. "I'm only a woman who would rather not eat alone." The man shifted the bowl toward the center, though almost nothing remained. "We don't have much," he said. "What we have, we share." Eliza waited until he offered twice before breaking off a small corner of crust. The boy pushed a hand-carved wooden horse across the table. One leg was shorter than the others, and a tiny hammer mark had been cut beneath its belly. "My pa made him." Eliza turned it gently in her fingers. "He made him well." The man's mouth moved as though he might smile. "Silas Thorne," he said. "This is my son, Leo." "Eliza." She gave no surname. Silas asked what had brought her west. "I'm looking for someone who helped my family a long time ago." "A friend?" "I don't know what to call him. He never gave us the chance to thank him." Silas watched her thumb trace a knife mark in the tabletop. "You don't look like you're chasing money," he paused. "You look like you lost something money couldn't bring back." Eliza lowered her eyes. A shadow crossed the table. Mr. Gideon Sterling stood at the edge of the porch in a fitted coat, too heavy for the weather. His boots were spotless. Imported tobacco clung to him. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, "what are you doing here?" Silas's expression changed at the name. Sterling glanced at the single bowl and smiled. "I see you've found one of Abilene's more expensive charities." Leo moved closer to his father. Silas placed one hand near the boy's shoulder, but did not rise. Sterling nodded toward Eliza. "She could buy your entire ranch and forget she owned it by supper." Silas met his eyes. "She asked for a chair. That's all I needed to know." Sterling laughed. "Wealthy women grow bored, Thorne. When she returns east, you'll still be what you were before she sat down." Eliza stood. Her voice remained low, forcing him to listen. "If you speak to Mr. Thorne or his son that way again, every bank and livestock investor from Abilene to St. Louis will hear how you treat men who cannot profit you." Sterling's smile faded. He touched the brim of his hat and walked away. Silas thanked Eliza for her kindness, but something had closed behind his eyes. He took Leo's hand and stepped into the dusty street. The boy looked back once, holding the wooden horse against his chest. Eliza remained beside the empty chair. When she reached into her embroidered bag for a handkerchief, a folded yellow receipt slipped onto the boardwalk. She bent and opened it. It was the last record connected to the stranger who had cleared her father's debt after the Chicago fire. At the bottom were two faded initials. ST beneath them was the tiny mark of a blacksmith's hammer. Eliza looked down the street where Silas had disappeared and closed her hand around the brittle paper. The man who could not afford a second bowl may once have saved everything her family owned, and he had never asked for a single thing in return. For 3 days, Eliza followed the roads beyond Abilene. She questioned stable hands, cattle drovers, freight drivers, and men working beneath the shade of open-front blacksmith shops. By noon each day, dust had settled into the seams of her blue dress, and the polished wheels of her hired carriage wore a thick coat of Kansas mud. Nearly everyone knew Silas Thorne. They said he shod horses, repaired plows, and took payment in eggs or grain when families had no cash. One old drover claimed Silas had once worked through an entire winter without collecting half the money owed him. No one knew where he had learned the trade. No one knew why a man with his skill lived so close to losing everything. Outside the livery, Sheriff Amos Bell examined the yellow receipt without touching it. "Cottonwood Bend lies north of town," he said. "Follow the creek road until you see the split rail gate." His eyes rested on the initials. "Sterling has been buying troubled ranches all along that corridor." "Is Silas in trouble?" Bell looked toward the stockyards. "Silas doesn't speak about himself, but when something breaks, he's the man folks call." He handed the receipt back. "Just remember, Mrs. Montgomery, some men would rather bleed than be treated like a debt." Eliza heard the forge before she saw the ranch. Clang, clang, clang. The sound carried over Cottonwood Creek like a second heartbeat. Beyond the gate stood a weathered house, a barn patched with mismatched boards, and a small herd grazing in the south pasture. A dry garden bordered by white stones lay beside the porch. Beneath the cottonwoods, Silas worked at an anvil with his sleeves rolled high. Leo sat on a hay bale, reading from a torn schoolbook. He looked up first. "Dad, the princess came back." Silas's hammer stopped in midair. Eliza stepped beneath the forge roof and held out the receipt. The moment he saw the hammer mark, something moved across his face. "You recognize it," she said. Silas set the hammer down carefully. "I knew your father. Did you clear his debt after the Chicago fire?" He turned toward the cooling trough. "Your father helped people, more than he probably remembered. How could a young man from Nevada afford such a payment? A lucky silver strike, a poor decision or two." He glanced at the paper. "Nothing worth building a monument over." Eliza told him she had searched for years so she could repay him. She offered to repair the barn roof, enlarge the forge, and settle whatever bank obligations burdened the ranch. Silas's jaw tightened. Cottonwood Bend is not for sale. I did not say it was. Then don't walk onto my land naming prices before you know what anything here costs. The words struck harder than she expected. Eliza returned to town without looking back. The following morning she came again. This time she wore a plain brown traveling skirt. There was no carriage driver, no basket, and no polished case. Only a pair of gardening gloves tucked beneath her arm. She walked to the dry patch beside the house. Did this belong to Clara? Silas looked up sharply. He told her his wife had grown mint, sage, and feverfew there before she became ill. Eliza knelt and began pulling weeds. She did not offer money. She asked where Clara had planted the mint. After a long silence, Silas brought a shovel and reset the fallen stones beside her. That was how she began returning. She dropped a harness buckle into the creek. A stubborn mare pulled her through the dust. She burned biscuits until Leo politely asked whether they were meant to be black. Silas laughed then, a brief sound he tried to hide. He taught her to hold a hammer without locking her elbow. He showed her where to stand beside a nervous horse and how the western clouds changed before rain. One evening, Leo fell asleep against Eliza's arm while Silas repaired the clasp on her traveling case. His thumb rested over the engraved initials of her married name. "Did you love him?" he asked. "William was kind," she said. "But kindness and closeness are not always the same thing." Eliza looked toward Clara's garden. What was she like? Silas followed her gaze. She could make a place feel warm before the fire was lit. Neither spoke for a while. Then hoofbeats sounded beyond the gate. Sterling's lawyer arrived with 2 witnesses and a folded notice bearing the county seal. He claimed Silas's mortgage had been transferred after the panic of 1873. Unpaid interest, penalties, a disputed cattle lien, 30 days before foreclosure. Silas insisted the debt had been paid. The lawyer produced a duplicate ledger stating otherwise. Eliza offered to settle it. Silas refused before the witnesses had even mounted their horses. When they were alone, she faced him beside the forge. "You are gambling with Leo's home. I won't let Sterling turn your affection into a price on my land. You think refusing me proves you are free." Her voice softened, but the words did not. "All it proves is that Sterling has learned which wound to press." That night, Silas opened an old iron box beneath his bed. Inside lay Clara's wedding ring, a torn map of Cottonwood Bend, and the final receipt from the failed bank. The same hammer mark appeared at the bottom, but the amount written there did not match Sterling's ledger. Someone had altered the debt, and Silas had only one surviving piece of proof. By sunrise, the receipt lay beneath a coffee cup on the table at Cottonwood Bend. Eliza studied the faded ink, while Leo traced the grain of the wood with one finger. "The handwriting changes here," she said. Silas leaned closer. The numbers on his receipt were narrow and slanted. Sterling's duplicate ledger used heavier strokes, with a different 7 and a rounded 2. Sheriff Bell agreed when they showed him both papers. "But a receipt won't beat a recorded claim by itself," he said. "We need the original ledger, a survey map, or a living witness who saw the transfer." The failed bank's office had been emptied after the panic of 1873. Sterling had purchased most of what remained. That evening, Samuel Price came through the ranch gate on a tired gray mare. The old rancher removed his hat before entering the kitchen, though dust had already settled in every line of his face. Sterling had taken Samuel's creek pasture 6 months earlier. "Same kind of paper," Samuel said. "Same threat. Sign away a piece or lose the whole place." He remembered Sterling's men moving survey stones along North Ridge. He also remembered an abandoned railroad cabin where maps and old bank records had once been stored. Before noon the next day, Silas and Eliza rode north. The trail climbed through dry grass and pale limestone. Eliza's mare stumbled twice on the loose ground, but she refused Silas's offer to turn back. Near the ridge, they found a survey stone sitting in freshly disturbed earth. Wagon tracks ran towards Sterling's property. Beside the abandoned cabin lay a scatter of ashes and the broken brass corner of a document box. Thunder rolled over the plains. Rain struck before they could begin the ride home, forcing them inside the cabin. Water tapped through holes in the roof and darkened the floorboards. Eliza noticed a small hammer carved near the wall. The same mark. Silas looked down. I repaired this place for a surveyor years ago. Why leave your mark on things and never claim them? He rubbed a thumb over the scar across his palm. A man should leave proof of his work, not proof that he expects praise. The rain thickened. Eliza held the yellow receipt between them. Your silence may have protected your pride. It denied my family the chance to thank you. Silas stood at the window for a long while. Then he told her about Chicago. He had been 10 when his mother died. His father had vanished months before. Hungry and cold, Silas tried to steal a loaf of bread from a bakery. The baker caught him and called for a constable. Henry Carter stepped forward instead. Eliza's father paid for the loaf, bought 3 more, and placed a silver dollar in the boy's hand. Don't let a hard world turn your heart to stone, he had said. Silas carried those words through mining camps, cattle drives, and winters when kindness seemed like a foolish thing to keep. Years later, after finding a small silver vein in Nevada, he read that Henry Carter's warehouses had burned in the Great Chicago Fire. The family property was about to be seized. Silas bought the mortgage claim through an attorney and ordered the title returned. He signed only ST and stamped the page with his hammer mark. Eliza sat very still. Her family's recovery had not been luck. It had been one loaf of bread traveling across years. What happened to the rest? She asked. Silas looked through the rain toward the distant ranch. Bought Cottonwood Bend, built the forge, helped a few mining families get east. His voice lowered. Then Clara got sick. He paid for physicians from Kansas City, medicines, and months of care that did not save her. The remainder disappeared when the bank failed. Losing money hurts, he said. Losing the man you chose to become hurts worse. He turned toward Eliza. Money is only metal. Kindness is the one thing that doesn't rust. She reached for his hand. At your table, I remembered how to be Eliza. Not Mrs. Montgomery. Not a name on a bank account. Silas lifted his other hand toward her cheek, then stopped. Would you still have come if you never found that receipt? Yes. Thunder shook the walls. They stood close enough for her to feel his breath, but he stepped away. Gratitude can feel like love when the past is heavy. The words wounded her more because he spoke them gently. When they returned to Cottonwood Bend, Leo was shivering beneath a wool blanket despite the summer heat. His face burned, his breathing came short and fast. By midnight, Silas had carried him into Clara's old room. The forge smoke and trapped heat made the child worse. Eliza ordered the hotel rooms prepared, then stopped herself. She knelt beside the bed. Let me help because I love him, she said, not because I owe you. Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he lifted Leo into his arms. At the Grand Central Hotel, Eliza sent a telegram to Junction City and brought in Ruth Carter, a black nurse and midwife known along Cottonwood Creek. For 3 nights, Leo's fever climbed. Silas cooled his face with wet cloths. Eliza read from the torn schoolbook. Ruth listened to the boy's breathing while the delayed doctor's train remained somewhere east of Abilene. Near dawn on the 4th morning, Silas bowed his head beside the bed. I should have given him better. Eliza placed a hand on his shoulder. You gave him a father who always took the smaller spoonful. Do not call that failure. If I lose him, there'll be nothing left. There will still be me, she said, unless you decide I have no right to stay. He could not answer. Then Leo's skin began to cool. His eyes opened slowly. He stared at the high hotel ceiling and whispered, Do we have any bread? Silas bent over him and wept. Outside the room, Gideon Sterling waited in the corridor. He placed a westbound train ticket on the table. "Leave Abilene with the boy," he said, "and I'll make the debt disappear." Silas looked through the doorway at Eliza holding Leo's hand. Then he picked up the ticket. He did not promise Sterling anything. He only folded the paper once and slipped it into his vest. That was enough to trouble him. By the time Leo was strong enough to return to Cottonwood Bend, Silas had grown quiet. He worked before sunrise and kept the forge burning long after the lamps were lit inside the house. The third chair no longer waited at the table. When Eliza came, he was courteous. He thanked her for bringing broth, medicine, and a new slate for Leo. But he kept his eyes on the horseshoes beneath his hammer and avoided every silence that might require honesty. Leo noticed. "Why don't you smile when Miss Eliza comes now?" Silas tightened a leather strap on the water barrel. "Some roads only cross for a little while." Leo looked toward the gate where Eliza's carriage had disappeared. "That doesn't sound like a good road." In town, the pressure worsened. Mrs. Gable arrived at Eliza's hotel room carrying a folded newspaper and a face arranged into concern. 2 St. Louis partners had withdrawn from future business. A notice in the Abilene paper questioned whether grief had left Mrs. Montgomery vulnerable to the influence of a desperate rancher. Eliza read it once. Then she held the corner over the lamp chimney until the paper curled black. Mrs. Gable stepped back. "You cannot burn every consequence." "No," Eliza said. "Only the ones pretending to be advice." Outside the livery, Sterling found Silas alone. He offered cancellation of the debt, enough cash to resettle Leo in Colorado, and passage on the next westbound train. In return, Silas would sign over the north pasture, the creek frontage, and the railroad survey ridge. Silas refused. Sterling adjusted his cuff. "Stay, and the boy grows up hearing his father courted a widow for her money. Leave, and he keeps his name." Silas walked away without signing. But that night, he rolled 2 blankets behind his saddle. He packed Leo's shirts in a grain sack. Clara's ring went into his coat pocket. The train ticket lay beneath the old bank receipt. Leo believed they were preparing for a journey. Eliza knew better the moment she stepped into the barn. She found Silas beside the forge, fitting a shoe to a bay mare. "You were going to leave without telling me." His hammer lowered. "I was going to spare you." "From what?" "From losing business. From talk. From waking one morning and regretting us." "You never asked what I regretted." Silas looked toward the house, where Leo was arranging his wooden horse on the windowsill. "He cannot survive another person leaving." "So you will leave first?" His face tightened. "I cannot remain in your world. I never asked you to. People will say I used your loneliness." "Then let them be wrong." He turned away. "Gratitude has confused you." Eliza stepped between him and the anvil. "You trust me with your son's life when fever takes him, but not with my own heart." Silas said nothing. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "You do not get to decide that a black woman's heart is too foolish to know its own choice." The forge went still. A coal settled with a soft crack. One of the horses stamped inside the corral. Silas looked at her, as if the truth had reached a place no argument had touched. Before he could answer, Leo shouted from the porch, "Pa, look north!" A black column rose beyond the dry pasture. Flame moved through the grass in 2 long orange lines. Silas saw at once that the fire had started in separate places. It had been set. He lifted Leo into Ruth Carter's wagon and ordered them toward the creek. Eliza sent a ranch hand for Sheriff Bell, then climbed onto the water wagon. "You go with Leo," Silas said. "No." "Eliza, the barn is already catching." Wind carried sparks across the hayfield. Cattle crowded against the creek fence. Smoke rolled low enough to blind the horses. Silas rode north to cut the trapped herd loose. Eliza drove toward the barn, a wet cloth tied over her nose and mouth. One horse panicked and overturned a barrel. The wagon wheel struck a rut and locked. She cut the team free seconds before flame reached the rear boards. Samuel Price and two neighbors came through the smoke, carrying green branches and soaked blankets. Together they beat down sparks along the house roof. Near the north fence, Silas's horse reared. He hit the ground hard. A burning rail fell across his leg. Eliza saw him through the smoke. She ran. "Save the house!" he shouted. She seized a fence lever, planted her boot against the earth, and lifted until the rail shifted enough for him to crawl free. His face had gone pale, but he was conscious. She dragged his arm across her shoulders and helped him onto the half-empty water wagon. Beyond them, two men were loading a metal document box from the abandoned survey cabin. One wore Sterling's foreman's coat. They set fire to the cabin wall before driving toward the ridge. A packet of charred papers fell from the wagon, but the box escaped. At the creek, Leo clutched his wooden horse beneath his shirt. When Sheriff Bell arrived, the boy pointed toward the burning cabin. "The mark under my horse," he said. "There's one like it under the floor." Bell, Samuel, and two ranchers entered after part of the roof collapsed. Beneath the hammer-marked board, they found a narrow iron compartment. Inside lay the original survey map, a paid receipt bearing Silas Thorne's full name, letters between Sterling and the failed bank clerk, and a railroad plan crossing Cottonwood Bend. Sterling arrived before dawn, pretending he had come to help. When he saw Bell carrying the papers, he lunged for them. Silas blocked him. Sterling struck Silas's injured leg with his cane. Silas fell against the anvil. Then his hand closed around the blacksmith's hammer. For one breath, the whole forge held still. Eliza said his name only once. Silas lowered the hammer. "A hard world doesn't choose the man I become." Sheriff Bell took Sterling by the arm and placed him under arrest. By sunrise, the barn roof was gone. Half the winter hay had burned. The forge stood blackened beneath the cottonwoods. Silas sat beside the cold anvil. Eliza lowered herself beside him. Neither mentioned the train ticket. Leo came between them and placed one hand in each of theirs. Sheriff Bell opened the final recovered envelope. Across the front was written, "Miss Eliza Carter." Inside lay a document dated years before her marriage. Silas stared at it. He had never known the paper survived. Sheriff Bell unfolded the document on the scorched work table while dawn spread pale light across Cottonwood Bend. The paper had been drawn up years before Eliza's marriage. After clearing Henry Carter's mortgage, Silas had instructed his attorney to place the remaining silver money into a trust for Henry's daughter. Miss Eliza Carter. Eliza read the name twice. Silas stood with one hand braced against the table, his injured leg stiff beneath him. "I saw you once," he said. She looked up. "Outside the bakery in Chicago. You were small, red scarf. Your father had just bought me bread." A faint memory stirred in her. Snow against a shop window, a thin boy beneath an alley awning, her own hands unwrapping a scarf. "I gave it to you," she whispered. "You were shivering too." Silas looked toward the burned pasture. "I never forgot." The trust had later been folded into Henry Carter's rebuilt business after the attorney's office failed. Part of the fortune Eliza inherited might have begun with the silver Silas once sent east. The discovery did not comfort him. It frightened him. "Every dollar you brought here may have been mine first," he said. "Maybe this was never equal." Eliza folded the document carefully. "That money passed through my father's work, my husband's investments, years of risk, and years of loss. It does not own either of us. You came west looking for the man who helped your family. I asked to sit with you before I saw the receipt." Silas said nothing. "I saw a father giving his son every piece of meat in the bowl," she continued. "That was the man I chose to know." 3 days later, the courthouse in Abilene filled before noon. Sterling remained in custody, but his lawyer challenged Eliza's control of her estate. He claimed grief and affection had made her easy to manipulate. Mrs. Gable sat behind the cattle buyers and railroad men. Samuel Price stood near the wall. Ruth Carter held Leo's hand in the front row. Eliza entered wearing the blue dress she had worn during the fire. Smoke had darkened the hem. One sleeve was neatly mended. The lawyer pointed toward Silas, seated in the rear. Did this rancher ask you for money? No. Land? No. Marriage? No. Then why involve your fortune in his affairs? Eliza looked across the room at Silas. Because I found forged ledgers, because families were being robbed, because a man should not lose his home merely because another man knows how to hide theft beneath a seal. Sheriff Bell placed the recovered letters, transfer records, and original survey map before the judge. The room grew quiet. Eliza turned toward Silas. What you gave my father belongs to the past, she said. What I give you now is not repayment. Her eyes did not leave his. It is my choice. The false claim against Cottonwood Bend was voided before sunset. Sterling's railroad agreement was suspended, and formal charges followed for fraud, conspiracy, and the fire. Outside the courthouse, Silas found Eliza beneath the shade of a hitching rail. You should have denied me, he said quietly. It would have been easier. For whom? He looked down. Eliza stepped closer. You tried to protect my dignity by refusing to believe I possessed any. Silas absorbed the words without defending himself. I was wrong. Yes. I am sorry. She waited. He raised his eyes. I kept calling it sacrifice because I was afraid to call it fear. Her expression softened, though she did not rescue him from the admission. I can forgive fear, she said. I cannot build a life with silence. Then I will speak. This time, when he reached for her hand, he did not stop halfway. Eliza did not buy Cottonwood Bend. Instead, they formed the Cottonwood Bend Cooperative. Silas retained the ranch and forge. Eliza financed a supply warehouse in Abilene. Seed, tools, and medicine would be offered on fair terms, and every major decision required both signatures. Silas studied the agreement at the kitchen table. You left me the right to disagree with you. I expect you to use it, he signed beside her name. The next morning, wagons began arriving. Samuel Price brought lumber. Ruth delivered medicine and flour. Ranch families carried fence rails, hay, nails, roofing boards, and seed for Clara's garden. No one called it charity. They spoke of horses Silas had shod without payment, plows repaired during hard winters, and meals given when cupboards were bare. The forge was rebuilt first. When Silas's hammer rang beneath the cottonwoods again, Eliza stopped in the garden and listened. Clang, clang, clang. That evening, Silas set a pot of stew near the damaged house. There were 3 bowls on the table. Leo placed his wooden horse beside the third. Eliza approached slowly, dust on her skirt and inventory ink on her fingers. The chair stood empty. Silas pulled it out. Miss Eliza, may I ask you to join us? She rested one hand on its back. For supper? He shook his head. For every meal I have left. He did not reach for her. He did not hurry her answer. Eliza looked at Leo, then at the long shadows beneath the cottonwoods. Only if there is always room for one more. Silas glanced toward the road. Then we'll build a longer table. 1 month later, they married beside the creek. Leo stood with his father. Ruth helped Eliza dress. Sheriff Bell witnessed the vows, and Samuel Price brought wildflowers wrapped in brown paper. Silas did not give Eliza Clara's ring. He forged a new one from the last small piece of Nevada silver he had kept all those years. Before the ceremony, Eliza placed fresh flowers in Clara's garden. Your son will know you, she whispered. Love will not erase you here. Silas heard from a distance and loved her more for saying it when she believed she was alone. By the following spring, a school stood beside the ranch road. Ruth worked from a clean medical room near the supply station. A long table beside the forge welcomed ranch hands, widows, travelers, and children coming home hungry. Years later, Leo taught in that school. The wooden horse rested on his desk. He told his students that buildings could burn, banks could fail, and fortunes could vanish before morning. Then he tapped the little horse. But what you give another person can travel farther than you ever will. Silas and Eliza grew old beneath the cottonwoods. Their house was never grand, but its porch was broad, its stew pot stayed warm, and the door was rarely locked. One summer evening, they sat beneath a fading gold sky. An empty chair stood beside them. It no longer meant loneliness, it waited for whoever came next. From inside came Leo's voice reading aloud and the quiet sound of bowls being placed on the table. Silas took Eliza's hand. Ready to go inside? She looked through the open doorway at the home they had built without ownership, surrender, or shame. Yes, she whispered, I'm home. Maybe that is what home has always been. Not the size of a ranch, not the balance in a bank account, not even the memories we carry from the people we've loved and lost. Home is the quiet place where someone saves a chair for you without asking what you can offer in return. If you had been sitting in Eliza's place that first afternoon in Abilene, would you have taken the empty chair? Or if you had been Silas, would you have found the courage to believe that kindness could come back around after so many hard years? Life rarely gives us easy answers, but every now and then it places someone in our path who reminds us that hearts can heal without forgetting the past. The smallest act of compassion may travel farther than we ever know. A loaf of bread, a shared bowl of stew, a steady hand during the hardest season, or one quiet invitation to stay can become the beginning of a future neither person imagined. I'd love to hear from you. What moment in this story stayed with you the longest, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words may encourage someone else who needs a little hope today. And if stories about enduring love, quiet courage, second chances, and the people who help us find our way home speak to your heart, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting just beyond the next dusty trail.